I grew up in a house where everything looked perfect from the outside. Polished floors, fresh flowers on the foyer table, a family portrait above the fireplace where everyone smiled like we liked each other. People in our town used to say, "The Brooks family didn't walk, we glided." What they didn't know was that all that elegance was held together with duct tape and denial. My parents, Charles and Victoria Brooks, cared about three things: reputation, reputation, and reputation. They weren't unkind because they wanted to hurt anyone. They were unkind because feelings got in the way of the image they were trying to protect. Their entire lives revolved around who was invited to their fundraisers, whose names were printed in the local magazine, and which families they should strategically sit next to at charity luncheons. My younger sister Ava fit that world perfectly. She had the kind of face that made people stop in grocery stores and say things like, "You should model." My parents adored her. They loved telling stories about her cheerleading trophies, her flawless Instagram page, her boyfriends from well-known families. If Ava sneezed, my mother would call the pediatrician. If Ava wanted a new car, my father would ask, "Convertible or coupe?" Meanwhile, I was the kid who read books in the corner and didn't care about the country club. I wasn't rebellious. I just never bought into the performance. But in my house, not buying into the performance was basically a felony. When I came home with straight A's, my mom would say, "That's nice, dear," while texting Ava's stylist. When I got accepted into a competitive leadership program in high school, my dad responded, "Make sure it doesn't interfere with your sister's recital. The family needs to be there for her." Now, that was the theme of my childhood. I was the responsible one, the steady one, the one who caused no trouble. But in the Brooks family, being reliable didn't make you lovable. It made you forgettable. I still remember the night everything clicked for me. It was one of those over-the-top dinners where my mom insisted on using the formal dining room because the mayor's wife might stop by. She never did, but the threat of her existence was enough to make us all sit straight-backed at the table like unpaid interns. My father was bragging about a business deal he closed. Ava was talking about a brunch invitation she got from a girl whose mother knew a senator, and my mom was nodding proudly like she had raised royalty. I mentioned, very casually, that I'd been selected for a statewide academic award. Not a single fork paused, not a single head turned. The only sound was Ava asking if we could switch the curtains to something more photogenic. I sat there chewing slow, feeling something settle inside me. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't anger, it was understanding. They weren't going to change. And if I stayed in that house long enough, I'd end up shrinking my entire life down to the size of their expectations. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't flip the table or storm out. I just watched the way they all talked around me like I didn't exist, and I knew that if I wanted any kind of real life, I'd have to build it somewhere else. The moment came a year later when recruiters visited my college. I listened to them talk about discipline, service, independence, and earning respect not because of your last name, but because of what you did. Something in me responded to that. Maybe it was the promise of structure. Maybe it was the idea of finally choosing a path that wasn't pre-approved by the Brooks family. Maybe it was the chance to breathe without being told how to breathe. When I told my parents about my decision to join the Air Force, the house practically shook. My mother demanded to know if I had lost my mind. My father asked if I understood the kind of people I'd be surrounded by. Ava didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, then laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. "You?" she said. "In the military? You can barely handle brunch." That sentence should have hurt. Instead, it confirmed that I was making the right choice. I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't try to justify anything. I just signed the papers, packed my bags, and walked out the front door, while my mother shouted after me that I was throwing away the Brooks image. Maybe I was. But the Brooks image had never done anything for me. The last thing I saw before I closed the door was Ava rolling her eyes like my life choices were an inconvenience to her social calendar. I didn't look back after that. There was nothing worth looking back at. I could still hear Ava's laugh in my head as I stepped off the bus onto the training base, the kind of laugh that stuck to your ribs for all the wrong reasons. The air smelled like dust and jet fuel, sharp enough to wake up parts of me I didn't know were asleep. For the first time in my life, no one cared about my last name. No one cared where I came from. No one paused to see whether I was a Brooks or a nobody. A woman with a clipboard just barked my name and told me to move. It was exactly what I needed. Boot camp wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the inspirational movie montage my parents assumed people imagined. It was loud, uncomfortable, and designed to make you question every confident thought you'd ever had. Every morning started before the sun, and every night ended with me falling asleep so fast I didn't even remember hitting the pillow. But the strangest part was how right it felt, as if all the parts of me that never fit in the Brooks household had been waiting for this place to show up. On my third day, we were doing a physical readiness test when I nearly dropped from exhaustion. My arms shook, sweat stung my eyes, and for a split second, I wondered if my mother would have enjoyed seeing me like that, finally struggling. I pushed harder out of spite. One of the instructors, a woman named Sergeant Keller, stopped beside me and said, "If you're still thinking about quitting, at least finish the set first." It was the closest thing to encouragement I'd heard in years. There were moments when I wanted to quit, but they never lasted long. Not because I was brave, but because quitting would have meant going back home, and I'd rather run until my legs snapped in half than stand in my parents' dining room, pretending to be grateful for a life that never felt like mine. I'd call that motivation messy and personal, but motivation nonetheless. By the time we reached weapons training, something had shifted in me. I wasn't just trying to escape anymore. I was trying to build something, to be someone who didn't need permission to exist. One afternoon, during a live simulation exercise, a trainee panicked and froze up behind a barrier instead of moving forward. Everyone else shouted. He couldn't hear any of it. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed his sleeve, grounded him with my voice, and got him through the drill. It wasn't a heroic moment. It wasn't dramatic, it was just instinct. But it surprised me. Later, Sergeant Keller pulled me aside. "You've got natural leadership," she said. "You don't brag. You don't crumble. You just act. Keep that." It was 2 sentences longer than anything my father had ever told me about myself. Graduation day came faster than I expected. My parents didn't show up. They sent a text the night before that said, "Congrats, busy weekend." Ava didn't even bother pretending. I didn't need them there. The applause from people who'd seen me sweat, struggle, and improve was worth more than all the charity galas in Connecticut combined. I went on to officer training with a kind of stubborn excitement. It wasn't easy, more studying, more drills, more pressure, but for once, the pressure had a purpose. I wasn't being shaped into a perfect accessory for my parents' social life. I was being prepared to lead actual people in actual situations that mattered. Every milestone felt like a small rebellion. Every uniform I put on was a quiet reminder that I'd chosen myself, even when no one else did. And then came the day I received my commission as an Air Force officer. I stared at the insignia in my hand longer than I should have. Not because it was shiny, but because it meant I'd done something without a single drop of permission from the Brooks family. Around that time, something else changed too, how I reacted to my parents' messages. They still sent the occasional text, usually full of backhanded concern. My mother asked whether the base housing was safe. My father wanted to know if there was a way out if the job didn't pan out long term. Ava sent me an invitation to her birthday dinner but added at the bottom, "It's formal, so maybe find something that fits." I stopped responding. Serving meant learning to focus on what actually mattered, and nothing about the Brooks family qualified. Not anymore. I poured myself into training, rotations, and assignments. I earned the respect of people who didn't care about my background, only what I showed up and did every single day. That was a new kind of freedom, addicting, grounding, and far more stable than anything my family ever offered. There were still nights when loneliness crept in, not for my parents, but for the version of me that once thought I could earn their approval if I worked hard enough. That girl had spent years trying to be the perfect daughter in a house where perfection wasn't even the point, it was just the excuse. The version of me who stood on that base, wearing boots instead of designer flats, finally understood why leaving had been necessary. The Brooks family didn't lose a daughter. They lost the chance to know a woman who could survive more than any of them ever did. If you've ever walked away from people who never made room for you, drop a comment and tell me about it. And if you want to keep following this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss where this path leads. The first morning I woke up as a commissioned officer, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Space. Not physical space. The dorm rooms weren't exactly generous. It was the mental kind, the kind where my thoughts weren't crowded by the sharp voices of people judging whether I was living my life correctly. I pulled on my uniform, tightened the belt, and realized I'd never owned anything that fit me this well, not because of the cut, but because of the life it represented. Officer training had its way of humbling you without asking for permission. People assumed officers coasted after commissioning. Whoever believes that has never spent a single day in those classrooms. We had coursework that made my college years look like a vacation. Endless leadership drills, tactical planning, briefings, and the constant pressure of knowing you weren't just training for yourself, you were training because one day, someone might depend on your decisions. And I loved it. I loved the structure. I loved the routine. I loved how no one cared about last names unless they were calling roll. I loved walking into a room and realizing I was judged on my competence, not on how well I matched the Brooks family aesthetic. For the first time, I wasn't competing with anyone. I was simply becoming someone. A few weeks in, our flight was assigned to a field exercise meant to test decision-making under pressure. We were split into teams and given a scenario involving a downed aircraft, limited resources, and a ticking clock. Most people responded the way college group project members do: too many opinions, not enough plans. But something about the chaos brought me clarity. While everyone listed what we didn't have, I listed what we did. While they debated who should lead, I was already organizing the equipment. I didn't raise my voice or wave my arms. I just acted. And people followed not because I demanded it, but because they recognized a plan that made sense. When we wrapped up, one of my teammates clapped me on the shoulder. "You ever led anything before?" I shrugged. "Just my own escape route." He didn't get the joke, but he got the point. Back at the base, the instructors reviewed our performance. They didn't do dramatic announcements or grand speeches. Sergeant Cho simply pointed at me and said, "Brooks, you lead well under pressure. Keep developing that." It wasn't flowery or emotional, but I'd take that over 20 years of Brooks family compliments, which usually sounded like, "You look presentable," or "Nice job, considering your limited options." On weekends, while others called home to catch up, I stayed in the common room finishing assignments or helping others with theirs. It wasn't because I was antisocial. I just didn't have anyone waiting on the other end of a phone call. And honestly, that turned out to be a blessing. Without the constant background noise of a disapproving family, I could hear my own thoughts clearly for the first time. Maybe that's why I bonded so quickly with the people around me. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. They didn't sugarcoat anything. They didn't waste time pretending to be better than each other. They shared protein bars, boot polish, and stories about their lives without ever asking where I bought my clothes or which club my parents belonged to. It felt like a temporary family, one that didn't ask me to perform. A few months later, we faced our most challenging evaluation yet, the emergency response simulation. It wasn't just about running or shooting or memorizing procedures. It was a live, moving scenario with alarms, smoke, actors playing victims, real-time communications, and constant curveballs thrown at us by instructors who seemed determined to make sure none of us slept that night. During the exercise, one of the casualties was a trainee who completely lost his composure. He stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, unable to move or respond. The noise was overwhelming, the lights were blinding, and he shut down. People yelled his name, but he didn't react. I stepped in front of him, blocking the flashing lights, and lowered my voice until it cut through the noise around us. "Look at me," I said. "You're good. Just breathe." He blinked. Once. Then again. Slowly, he stabilized, and we got him back into the scenario. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heroic. It was human. And it mattered. When the simulation ended, our supervisors didn't say much. They rarely did. But later that night, Sergeant Cho found me cleaning my gear. "You've got instincts you can't teach," he said quietly. "Use them well." That meant more to me than any award my family ever forced me to accept at the country club. My confidence didn't come from being better than anyone. It came from noticing how people changed around me. My team trusted me. They looked to me when things turned uncertain. They didn't need me to be perfect. They needed me to be steady. And that was something I could be without sacrificing who I was. The longer I served, the clearer it became. This was the life I was supposed to build. Not the one with cocktail dresses and forced smiles, but the one with long days, early mornings, and a sense of purpose that didn't evaporate once the guests went home. Every promotion, every qualification badge, every new responsibility felt like adding bricks to a home I was building from scratch. And unlike the Brooks mansion, this home didn't collapse when someone stopped pretending. It stood on real ground, solid and earned. There's a certain kind of peace that comes from knowing you don't need approval from people who never understood you. And there's an even deeper peace that comes from proving, quietly and steadily, that you are capable long before anyone believed it. That peace stayed with me as my military career grew into something that felt both bigger than me and exactly right for me, shaping the path that would eventually lead me to the person who changed everything without even trying. I was wiping sweat from my neck after a brutal afternoon drill when I first noticed him leaning against a utility truck like he had nowhere better to be. I wasn't looking for anyone. Romance wasn't on my priority list. My entire focus at the time was qualifying for my next certification and keeping my team sharp. But there he was, sleeves rolled, arms crossed, watching the training field, with an expression that said he understood every moving part without needing to squint. Lieutenant Commander Jack Hale. Back then, all I knew was that he was Navy, attached to a joint training project on our base, and annoyingly calm for someone who looked like he carried more stress than he ever admitted. I didn't even know his rank the first week. I barely glanced at his insignia. All I saw was a man who carried himself like he'd earned everything the hard way. He didn't approach me with cheesy lines or dramatic entrances. He just showed up, every day at roughly the same time, like clockwork. He'd stand there with a coffee he wasn't really drinking, nod at me like he was acknowledging a teammate instead of a stranger, and leave before I could decide whether he was intriguing or irritating. One afternoon, while I was gathering equipment, he called out, "Your formation breaks early on the left. Whoever's leading needs to slow the pace a hair." I turned. "And you're offering coaching tips now?" He shrugged. "Gravity offers coaching. I'm just translating." I should have walked away. Instead, I found myself laughing an actual, out-loud laugh that caught me off guard. He smiled back, not smug, just warm. Like someone who appreciated the sound more than the joke. Over the next weeks, our conversations grew from one-liners to full-on debates about leadership, training methods, and whether powdered eggs should be considered a crime. He had opinions, sharp ones, but he listened, really listened, the way people rarely do unless they respect you. One evening, after a late briefing, he found me in the hallway, studying a maintenance report. He didn't say anything at first. He just leaned next to me, shoulder to shoulder, reading with the same focused stare he used on the training field. "You work too much," he said. "So do you." "Yeah," he admitted, "but you make it look more noble." I nudged him with my elbow. "Please, I fix problems." "You fix bigger ones." "Not always," he said quietly. "Sometimes I just hold things together until someone smarter shows up." It wasn't flirting in the traditional sense, but something settled between us, something steady. A week later, he invited me for a run. Just a run, not a date, not a setup. And running with him felt easy, which was a surprise considering he moved like a machine built for endurance. He didn't talk much, but every time he glanced over to check my pace, the look wasn't competitive. It was considerate. Eventually, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner in town. I said yes, before remembering that I had no idea whether dating someone from a different branch but connected to a joint project was a bad idea. It wasn't against any direct rules, but military culture loves gossip more than coffee. Still, I went. He picked a tiny diner with vinyl booths and a menu written by someone who clearly hated spell check. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't brag. He didn't act like he was doing me a favor. He just asked questions, real ones, about why I joined, about what I hoped for, about the life I left behind. I didn't give details, but he understood the gaps, the quiet parts, the things I didn't say. At the end of the night, when he walked me to my car, he didn't lean in or make a bold move. He just rested a hand on the doorframe and said, "I like the way you carry yourself, Brooks." Meaning? Like you've survived things without letting them define you. That was the moment something shifted. Not dramatic, just clear. Over the next months, he became my constant without ever trying to become the center of my world. He respected my ambitions, matched my pace, and never once hinted I should tone myself down or fit into some mold. On base, we kept things discreet. Off base, we were just two people figuring out their rhythm. He noticed the little things, when I was tired, when I was frustrated, when I needed 3 minutes of silence before talking, and he never pulled rank, even when I later learned exactly how high that rank was. The night everything changed, we were sitting in the back lot of the base, sharing cold fries out of a paper bag. The sky was clear, the air sharp enough to keep you awake. He looked at me with that steady expression he used when he was choosing his words carefully. "You ever think about a future?" he asked. "In general or with you?" I asked. "With me," he said softly. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yeah, I have." He nodded, like he'd been hoping for that answer but prepared for the opposite. "I don't need perfect," he said. "I don't need flashy. I need someone who walks beside me because she wants to, not because the world thinks she should." I looked at him, really looked, and what I felt wasn't butterflies or fireworks. It was something better, certainty. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. He exhaled, slow and steady, like he'd been holding that breath for a long time. From that night on, we weren't casual. We were committed, not loudly, not recklessly, just truthfully. And that truth became its own kind of refuge, especially as my family grew more vocal about everything they believed I was doing wrong. They had no idea who he really was. They assumed military meant low status. They couldn't imagine a world where service and sacrifice mattered more than social invites and spotless reputations. They had no idea that the man they brushed off as a nobody was already carrying responsibilities they couldn't begin to understand. And I didn't rush to correct them. Some truths grow stronger when held quietly. And loving him was one of them. Jack's hand brushed mine as we crossed the parking lot after a late shift, the kind of small touch that felt natural, not staged. I didn't pull away. I didn't hide it. At that moment, liking him felt simple. Everything outside that moment was the complicated part, especially my family. When I finally told them I was dating someone, the temperature in the Brooks household dropped so sharply, I swear. Connecticut weather took notes. I didn't even reveal his name, just mentioned he worked in the military. That was enough to set off alarms louder than the ones on base. My mother didn't bother pretending to care. "Another uniform? Elena, really? What is this phase supposed to prove?" She said phase the same way people talk about mold. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. If this man is in the service, what exactly does he do? Entry, level, logistics, maintenance? The way he said maintenance made me want to throw his collection of antique cufflinks in the river. My sister Ava, who had perfected the art of weaponized laughter, leaned back in her chair and smirked. "So you're bringing home a soldier boy? Let me guess, rank and file? Boots on the ground?" "Elena, come on. You know Mom and Dad will never attend a wedding like that." A wedding! I hadn't even mentioned the word. But to them, the idea of me ending up with anyone outside their social circle already qualified as a scandal. It didn't matter that Jack was kind. It didn't matter that he listened. It didn't matter that he carried the kind of responsibility they'd never survive for 5 minutes. They decided who he was before ever meeting him. And they decided I was embarrassing them again. When I told Jack, he didn't get angry. He didn't try to fix it. He just looked at me with a steady calm that made the rest of the world feel loud and ridiculous. "Do you want them there?" he asked. "I want them to care," I admitted. He nodded slowly. "That's different." We didn't rush into an engagement. We didn't stage some dramatic moment. It happened one quiet evening in my apartment when he walked in, dropped his keys on the counter, and said, "I don't know how much the world expects from us, but I know what I want. I want you beside me. All the noise can stay outside. It wasn't a perfect speech. It wasn't Instagram material, but it was real, and it was enough. When I called my family, the reaction proved exactly why I'd left home in the first place. My mother inhaled sharply, as if I'd just told her I planned to live in a ditch. "You're marrying into the military? Elena, are you listening to yourself? You expect us to smile in front of people while you drag our name into some officer's barracks?" My father cut in. "You're grown. We can't stop you. But don't expect us to attend. We can't support that." That apparently meant my entire relationship. Then Ava sealed it with a laugh sharp enough to slice glass. "I'm sorry, but who would be caught dead at that wedding? No offense, but I'd rather get audited." I hung up before I said something. I couldn't walk back. The next weeks moved fast: venue, dress, paperwork, scheduling around deployments. Jack wasn't flashy. He didn't want a huge wedding. Neither did I. We chose a small garden off base, with a minister who charged less than my sister spends on brunch. My team on base wanted to come in uniform. They didn't ask. They just assumed because in our world, showing up for each other isn't optional. But I told them no. I didn't want my family turning that into gossip too. The day of the wedding arrived crisp and blue, the kind of weather that feels borrowed from a postcard. I didn't have bridesmaids fussing over me. I didn't have anyone steaming my dress. I didn't have a mother tearing up while pretending she wasn't emotional. I stood alone in a tiny preparation room with a mirror that had seen better days. The dress fit simply, without drama. My hair was pinned back because anything else felt impractical. I checked my phone once. No new messages. No apologies. No change of heart. The officiant knocked lightly. "They're ready for you." "Who's they?" I asked. "Your guests." "Not family. Guests." I stepped out to find Jack waiting under a small arch draped in white fabric, sunlight catching his uniform just enough to make him look like he belonged exactly there, calm, grounded, unwavering. He held himself with the posture of a man who understood duty, but his eyes softened the second he saw me. There were a handful of chairs, a few colleagues, a retired chief I once worked with, 2 neighbors from my apartment building. I counted 13 people in total. 13 people who showed up simply because they cared. But in the front row, 3 seats sat empty. Mother of the bride. Father of the bride. Sister. I didn't cry when I walked down the aisle. I thought I might. But instead, I felt something else, a steadiness I'd spent my whole life searching for. Every step felt honest, clean, mine. Jack offered his hand when I reached him. "You good?" he whispered. "I am," I said, and I meant it. The ceremony wasn't dramatic. No one fainted. No one objected. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the quiet strength in Jack's voice when he promised things I knew he would actually deliver. When we kissed, the guests cheered not because it was a spectacle, but because it was right. Afterward, while we took photos under a tree that leaned slightly left, one of the older chiefs patted Jack's shoulder and said, "You married up, son." Jack squeezed my waist and murmured, "Don't I know it?" Huh. We laughed, not the forced polite laughter of charity galas or country club dinners, but the kind that feels like a new beginning. What I didn't know then was this. The same family that refused to attend my wedding would soon find themselves staring at a television screen they never expected, watching the nobody I married step onto a stage they couldn't buy their way into, And for once in their lives, they would understand exactly what they threw away. But right then, standing beside Jack with sunlight warming the back of my neck, all I knew was that real love isn't measured by who shows up for the photos. It's measured by who shows up for you. And he did, every day. The morning after the wedding, sunlight slipped across our kitchen table while Jack brewed coffee like it was a military operation. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a t-shirt and dog tags faintly tapping against his chest, but he still carried that same calm steadiness that made me feel like the world couldn't shake us unless we let it. I sat across from him, still adjusting to the word wife. He slid a mug toward me and said, "You're quieter than usual." "I'm thinking," I replied. "Dangerous," he teased. I nudged him with my foot. "My family didn't call, not even to pretend they forgot the date." Jack took a sip. "You didn't marry them." It was a simple answer, but it landed exactly where I needed it. The weeks that followed were busy. My unit prepared for a mobility exercise, Jack handled a stack of briefings, and the world outside our little apartment kept spinning the way it always had. But something new lingered in the background. A Navy event circled in red on our shared calendar. Joint Service Valor Recognition Ceremony. Life. Jack barely mentioned it, the same way most people might ignore a dentist appointment. Any time I asked about it, he downplayed it. It's nothing, he'd say, just a formality. A formality didn't explain the number of emails he received, the security precautions, or the fact that 3 different commands were involved. But I didn't push him. We both came from worlds where privacy mattered, his for professional reasons and mine for survival. 2 days before the ceremony, he finally said, "You're coming with me, right?" I looked up from folding laundry. "I'm your wife, try stopping me." His smile was small, but unmistakably proud. The venue was a large hangar transformed just for the event. Flags lined the stage, polished floors reflected the overhead lighting, and service members from every branch filled the rows. High-ranking officers stood in small groups, speaking in low, measured tones. Jack walked beside me in full dress whites, looking like authority itself. His ribbons glinted under the lights, though he wore them like someone who never learned how to boast. I noticed something else, how every sailor and Marine we passed nodded at him with the kind of respect you don't fake. Some stood a little straighter. Some called him sir, with an extra beat of admiration. A few officers even stepped aside so he could pass first. That wasn't nothing. Jack guided me to our seats, but before we could sit, a voice called sharply from behind. "Lieutenant Commander Hale." A group of officers approached. One of them, a rear admiral, shook Jack's hand firmly and then looked at me. "And you must be Mrs. Hale," he said. "We're honored to have you here." I blinked, realizing this ceremony wasn't just something Jack was attending. He was part of it. The program started. Speeches, introductions, commendations. Then a captain stepped up to the mic and said, "Our next recognition is for actions that prevented a catastrophic international incident. The details are classified, but the valor is not." My heart kicked once, sharp. Lieutenant Commander Jack Hale, United States Navy. The room applauded as Jack stood, calm, steady, unbothered. I froze. This was the man my family dismissed as some low-level uniform. Oh, this was the man they thought wasn't good enough to sit at their table. Jack walked onto the stage with a quiet confidence that didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. His presence did the talking. The citation was summarized, not the classified parts, but the courage, the leadership, the decisions he made that saved lives. Then the presenter said something that anchored itself in my chest. This is an officer who embodies everything the uniform stands for: integrity, judgment, and service before self. Service before self. The exact opposite of my family's motto. When they pinned the medal on Jack's chest, the applause rolled through the hangar like a wave. People stood. Officers saluted. Even the civilians joined in. My throat tightened as I watched him accept the recognition with a quiet humility most people only pretend to have. And then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. A broadcast camera turned toward the stage. The ceremony was going live. Not just on base channels. On national news. A Navy broadcaster announced, "This portion of the ceremony is being streamed as part of our annual highlight reel, celebrating service across all branches." My stomach dropped. My family watched everything that made them look important: news segments, Washington galas, military specials during election years. They would see this. They would see him. They would see me standing beside him. The ceremony continued, but a quiet realization settled over me. The truth always finds its way out. Not through arguments, not through begging, just through reality, stepping into the light. After the event, people lined up to shake Jack's hand. Someone snapped photos for press releases. A Marine colonel thanked him personally. I watched it all with a steady calm of my own. Jack slipped an arm around my waist. "You okay?" I nodded. "More than okay." He studied my face like he already knew what I was thinking. "Your family?" "They'll see it," I said. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply replied, "Whatever they do with the truth is on them, not you." On our way out, my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again, and again. I didn't even need to check it to know. For once, I didn't rush to answer. Walking with Jack toward the parking lot, listening to the steady click of his metals, feeling his fingers intertwined with mine, I realized something bigger than revenge or validation or pride. I had built a life they couldn't diminish. And this time, the world was watching them learn it. Jack unlocked the car and held the door for me, but my phone buzzing nonstop pulled my attention like a magnet. I finally looked at the screen. 23 missed calls from my mother, 11 from my father, 5 from my sister Ava. A stream of texts lit up the notification bar like someone had broken into the family group chat and set it on fire. Jack glanced at my expression. Bad? Predictable, I said, sliding the phone into my pocket without opening a single message. We drove off the base in silence, the kind that felt comfortable, not tense, not heavy, just two people thinking separately while moving in the same direction. When we got home, Jack tossed his cover onto the counter, loosened his collar, and said, "Whatever's waiting on that phone doesn't get to ruin your night." "I know," I replied. But the truth was, my hands hadn't stopped tingling since I saw the ceremony camera turn toward him. Not because I wanted revenge. Because for the first time, the world saw him the way I always had. I set my phone face down and grabbed ingredients for a simple dinner, pretending the vibration didn't feel like a mosquito trapped in a jar. Halfway through chopping vegetables, I finally flipped the phone over. The texts weren't subtle. "Mom, Elena, call me. Right now. Mom, we saw the news. Why didn't you tell us? Dad, Lieutenant Commander? Is that correct? Why weren't we informed? Ava, Elena, I'm dying. Why didn't you say he was someone?" Someone. There it was. The very word that showed everything I needed to know. To them, Jack had value only because the world had just witnessed his. I put the phone down and stirred the pan, the oil popping like applause. Jack came up behind me, resting a hand on my back. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Liar," he teased lightly. "Maybe a little annoyed," I admitted. "Do you want me to say anything? Make anything easier?" "No, I want to handle it myself." He kissed the side of my head. "Then I'll just stay out of your way, unless someone needs to be thrown off the balcony." I laughed, and the knot in my chest loosened. The next morning, the knocks started sharp, insistent, and entirely without shame. Jack and I exchanged a look. "My parents," I said. He opened the door before I could object. My mother swept inside first, wearing a smile so bright it could have powered a street lamp. My father followed, stiff and rehearsed. Ava trailed behind them, sunglasses big enough to look like she was either hiding from paparazzi or hiding a hangover. My mother air-kissed the air near my cheek. "Honey, we came as soon as we saw the broadcast. Congratulations are in order." "For what?" I asked. "For your marriage, of course," she said, as though she hadn't refused to show up to the actual wedding. My father stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "Lieutenant Commander Hale, I had no idea your rank was—" Jack cut him off politely but firmly. "Ma'am, sir." He nodded once. No warmth, no coldness. Just military professionalism polished and bulletproof. They mistook it for friendliness. "Jack," my mother said, forcing a laugh. "We're family now. Please call me Margaret." Jack didn't respond. My father cleared his throat. "We'd love to hear more about your commendation. The details are vague." "Then, there's a reason for that," Jack said simply. They didn't like that answer, but they also didn't know how to push back against someone with real authority. Ava took off her sunglasses and gave me an expression she probably thought was soft and vulnerable. It mostly looked like she'd seen a ghost wearing my uniform. "Elena, why didn't you tell us he was well important?" I folded my arms. "Because you told me his career embarrassed you before you ever knew anything about it." That's unfair," she said quickly. "No," I replied. "It's accurate." My mother waved a hand dismissively. "Well, what matters now is that your husband made the family very proud on national television." Jack stiffened almost imperceptibly. There it was. They weren't proud of him. They were proud of what his status did for them. "Anyway," my father said, reaching into his coat, "there's a small item we need to discuss." He handed me an envelope. I didn't need to open it to know it wasn't a heartfelt card. I opened it anyway. Inside was a legal declaration asking me to reaffirm separation from certain family trusts and estates due to public optics and brand cohesion concerns. They came all the way to my home, not to apologize, not to reconcile, not to understand, but to protect their reputation. I let the paper hang from my fingers. "This is why you came?" I asked. "We felt it best to be clear," my father said, handling it politely, face to face. "You want me to distance myself legally because my husband upstaged your expectations on live television?" My mother's smile faltered. "Don't be dramatic." Jack stepped forward, not aggressive, not heated, just precise. "That document won't be signed," he said calmly. My mother blinked as if shocked a military officer could talk back to her social pedigree. "Excuse me?" Jack looked her in the eye. The steadiness in him could have leveled a room. "Elena doesn't answer to you anymore." My father looked stunned. Ava swallowed hard. And my mother, who had spent her entire life controlling rooms like this, finally lost her footing. "Elena," she said sharply, "you cannot let him dictate." "He's not dictating," I cut in. "He's protecting what you never valued." My father's jaw tightened. "So you actually choose this life?" "Yes," I said, but the truth was bigger than that. I chose myself. I folded the document back into the envelope and handed it to my father. "I'm not signing away anything. Not my husband, not my dignity, and not my peace." My mother's face hardened. Ava looked down. My father straightened his tie, a habit he had when he lost control of a situation. "That's your final decision?" he asked. I nodded. They left without another word. The door clicked shut, quiet and small. Jack exhaled slowly. "You okay?" "For the first time," I said, "I think I actually am." I didn't look out the window to watch them go. I didn't need to. Some exit don't deserve an audience. Jack's hand brushed mine as we cleaned up the kitchen, the quiet kind of contact that steadied everything inside me. I didn't look toward the door or think about whether my parents were still in the parking lot fuming. I focused on rinsing plates, stacking bowls, and the simple calm of a home built on things that didn't shift with public opinion. I slept well that night, better than I had in years. 3 days later, the news broke. It happened early in the morning while I was lacing my boots for PT. Jack, half-dressed and half awake, held his phone out with a baffled frown. "You should see this," he said. The headline sitting on the screen felt unreal for a moment. "State investigation into Brooks Real Estate Holdings expands. Possible federal review." My family had always treated their name like a bulletproof vest. Turns out it was more like a paper napkin. I sat down slowly. "This has to be a mistake." "It's not," Jack said quietly. "And it's not small." 9. The article explained the situation with brutal clarity: questionable zoning deals, rushed approvals, missing documentation, and whispers of political back-channeling. Nothing fully proven yet, but enough for officials to open formal inquiries. My father had spent decades building his empire on charm, handshakes, and an inflated sense of invincibility. My mother polished it with charity galas and photo ops. Ava accessorized it with her spotless social image. And now the foundation was cracking. Jack watched me carefully. "You okay?" "I didn't want this," I said. "Not like this." "I know." He didn't say, "They deserve it." He didn't say karma. He just sat next to me and let me decide what I felt. Later that afternoon, another headline dropped, then a third. It spread like wildfire through business channels and political blogs. Every outlet that once praised my parents was now dissecting them like a case study in overconfidence. By evening, my sister finally texted, "AVA, everything's a mess. Mom's losing it. Dad's meeting with lawyers. Call me?" I stared at the message long enough for the screen to dim. Jack walked behind me, setting a hand on my shoulder. "You don't owe them emotional rescue." "I know," I said, "but she's still my sister." He didn't argue. He trusted me to choose. When I called Ava, she answered instantly. "Elena." Her voice didn't sound like hers. Gone was the sharp confidence, the polished smugness. In its place was something tired, almost hollow. "You saw the news?" she asked. "Yeah." "It's bad. Like, really bad. Mom's trying to pretend it's all exaggerated. Dad's blaming political enemies. But I saw the documents, the zoning stuff, The land deal? It's not just rumors. I could hear her pacing. They're panicking, she said. And when they panic, they get mean. That part I didn't need explained. You okay? I asked. Ava let out a shaky exhale. Honestly, I don't know. I've never seen them like this, and I've never felt this. Shut out. You're their favorite, I said. I was, she corrected, until I became inconvenient. There was a pause, the kind that carried years of buried truth. Elena, she said quietly, I think something's going to come out, something big, and I didn't know who else to tell. That hit harder than I wanted it to. You did the right thing calling, I said. What do you need? Ava hesitated. Can I come over? Yeah, I whispered. Come over. When she arrived, she looked nothing like the woman who once tossed insults like confetti. Her hair was unstyled, her makeup smudged, and her eyes were wide in that way people get when they realize the ground they trusted isn't solid. Jack made her tea, giving her space without making her feel like a guest. She held the mug with both hands, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. I know I've been awful, she said suddenly. To you, to Jack. But I swear I didn't know what Dad was doing with those land deals. And Mom, she's acting like the world is attacking her for no reason. That tracks, I said. Ava gave a sad laugh. Right? I think they believe their own lies. They spent so many years talking big that they forgot to check if any of it was real. She looked toward the window, voice dropping. I don't want to go down with them. It wasn't scheming. It was fear, real fear. And I recognized it. My family had always worshipped control. Now they were watching it slip through their fingers. I asked her directly, what exactly are you worried will come out? She swallowed hard. Dad's offshore accounts, some property transfers. There's a foundation grant that didn't go where it was supposed to. And Mom, she told her board she had certain donors lined up who never actually agreed to anything. Jack leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Not judgmental, just listening, observing. You're not responsible for their decisions, I said. No, she said, shaking her head. But I was raised to believe our name mattered more than honesty. I didn't question anything. You are questioning it now, I said. That counts. Ava looked up at me, eyes red. How do you stay so calm? I glanced at Jack. Because I built a life that doesn't collapse every time someone stops applauding. Agree. Ava followed my gaze to Jack, who simply nodded at her. It was a quiet moment, but something softened in her expression, like she was realizing for the first time why I chose him. While Ava stayed that night, curled under a blanket on our couch, my parents held press conferences, released carefully worded statements, and clung to the appearance of control. But the world had finally seen the cracks. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was breaking with them. I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground. Not because they were falling, but because I'd stopped trying to hold them up. Ava stayed curled up on our couch long after the sun came up, wrapped in one of Jack's old navy blankets like she was trying to build a wall between herself and the life she'd been clinging to for years. I brewed coffee, quietly setting a cup beside her. She didn't touch it at first. She just sat there, shoulders tight, breathing shallow like, if she inhaled too deeply, everything she believed about our family might collapse for good. Jack stepped out for a supply run, giving us space without making a show of it. He had a talent for reading emotional weather like radar. Ava finally whispered, I don't know who I am without them. I pulled out a chair and Saturday. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. She let out a bitter half-laugh. Easy for you to say. You got out. You built something. You didn't care what anyone thought. That's not true, I said. I cared for a long time. I cared until it exhausted me. But you left. I had the military, I said. It gave me structure, purpose, people who didn't expect perfection. Ava bristled, defensive. Are you saying I'm shallow? I'm saying you were raised in a system designed to keep you shallow, and you're finally waking up. Her eyes flashed, a mix of wounded pride and dawning clarity. You think Mom and Dad ever really loved us? They loved what we represented, I said. But unconditional love? No, they didn't have the tools for that. Ava's jaw trembled. I thought being the favorite meant something, but the second I wasn't useful, they turned on you. I finished for her. She nodded, and tears finally fell, real ones, not the dramatic kind she used to weaponize. I wasn't used to comforting Ava. Growing up, she always pretended she didn't need anything. She knew how to be dazzling, not genuine. But sitting there now, stripped of the Brooks image, she looked like a version of herself I'd never met. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice thin. Dad told me to distance myself publicly until all this blows over. Mom said crying on camera would make me look manipulative. And then, they told me not to come home for a while, said the optics were bad. My stomach tightened. They kicked you out? They said it wasn't kicking me out. They said it was strategic separation. I snorted. That's kicking you out with extra syllables. Ava let out a small, shaky laugh. I hate that I still want their approval. That's not weakness, I said. That's conditioning. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When did you stop wanting it? I thought for a moment. Probably the day I walked down the aisle alone. Ava winced. I'm sorry. You should be, I said plainly. But apology accepted. She blinked fast. Just like that? You're trying, I said. That matters. You're here, aren't you? You didn't run home to play innocent. You came because you knew something wasn't right. Ava tugged the blanket tighter around her. They would never help me if the situation were reversed. I know, I said. That's why someone has to break the pattern. She looked at me like she wasn't sure she deserved that chance. A moment later, the front door opened and Jack stepped inside carrying grocery bags. Ava sat up straighter, instinctively smoothing her hair. Jack gave her a small nod. Got breakfast. She whispered, thanks, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to accept kindness without earning it. While we ate, Ava watched us careful, observant, almost studying how a real partnership worked. Jack made space for her without being overly soft. I answered her questions without letting her drag me back into old dynamics. At one point, she asked Jack directly, how do you deal with family who doesn't approve of your choices? He didn't hesitate. You outgrow them. Ava swallowed. And what if you don't know how? You learn, he said. And you stop pretending shrinking yourself will keep anyone happy. Ava absorbed that like sunlight on cold skin. Later that afternoon, she pulled me aside. There's something else, she said quietly. Something I didn't tell you. 1. I braced myself. Okay. You remember Dad's Lakeview development? I nodded. It wasn't just zoning issues, she whispered. There's a whistleblower, someone from inside the company, and they're cooperating with investigators. Dad's terrified. Mom thinks it's a betrayal. Do you know who it is? I asked. She hesitated. I think it's one of the accountants, Maria. She tried to warn them months ago about irregularities, and they ignored her. I sat back. So Dad didn't just bend rules. He ignored someone trying to fix things? Ava nodded slowly. They always think consequences are for other people. I exhaled through my nose. Well, they're learning. Ava looked down. I don't want to end up like them. I don't want to spin, or lie, or pretend everything is perfect. You don't have to, I said. What if I mess up? Then, you start over. And if they never forgive me for being honest, then you'll survive, I said. Because honesty is cheaper to carry than shame. However, she shook her head slowly, like she was adjusting to an entirely new gravity. You really are nothing like them. Thank God, I said lightly. That finally made her laugh. That evening, she helped me prep dinner. She peeled potatoes slowly, like someone concentrating on an unfamiliar skill. Jack cooked chicken on the stove, humming under his breath. Ava watched us move around each other, passing spices, opening cabinets, stealing small touches like we'd been doing it for years. At one point she said quietly, "It's peaceful here." Jack looked up. "That's the goal." Ava nodded. "I want that." "You can have it," I said. "Not if I go back home." "Then don't," I said simply. Ava stared at the cutting board for a long moment. "Do you think I could change?" I thought of the girl who mocked my wedding, the girl who weaponized privilege, the girl who was terrified of losing the pedestal she'd been raised on. Then I thought of the girl sitting here now raw, humbled, and finally telling the truth. "Yes," I said, "but you'll have to choose it every day." She nodded, eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. For the first time in her life, Ava Brooks didn't look like she was trying to impress anyone. She just looked like she was ready to become someone new. And that was worth more than any apology she could have given me. Ava helped set the dinner table with the careful movements of someone relearning basic steps. The clink of silverware was the only sound for a moment, steady and soft. Jack walked past her to grab a pitcher of water, and she stepped aside automatically, not in fear, but in respect. I could tell she was studying us again, absorbing what a real household feels like when people aren't performing for anyone. By the time we sat down, the room felt warmer than it had all day. Ava pushed food around her plate before finally saying, "I need to tell you something else that's happening, something Mom and Dad don't know I overheard." Jack paused mid-bite. Ava continued, "The board from Mom's foundation met today. They're forcing her to step down, quietly. No press statement, but the donors are already pulling support." I leaned back. "She'll see that as betrayal." "She already does," Ava said. "She blamed the board, then blamed the press, then blamed whoever leaked the land deal issue. But she never once blamed herself." That part didn't surprise me. Accountability never lived in the Brooks family vocabulary. Jack wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Your father?" Ava glanced between us. "He got a notice this morning. The state wants financial records going back 7 years. He tried to call a senator he donated to, but the guy didn't return his call. That more than anything showed how bad things were. My father's entire identity was built on the belief that powerful people would always pick up the phone when he called." Ava added, "Dad's pretending everything is fine, but he spent the whole day pacing." Mom cried for a while, then stopped crying so she could practice looking dignified for reporters. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would make the situation more or less devastating. After dinner, Ava sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. I joined her, the cool air settling around us. The distant hum of cars drifting by below us felt more honest than the silence my parents always forced at home. Ava watched the streetlights flicker on. "It's strange," she said. "Part of me feels sad, and the other part feels relieved." "Relieved?" I asked. She nodded. "Like I've spent years carrying a glass sculpture that everyone praised, but no one let me put down, and now it finally shattered, and I'm just standing here with empty hands." "No, empty hands aren't a bad start," I said. She wrapped the blanket tighter. "Mom called earlier. You know what she said? She said I needed to distance myself until the image stabilizes. She asked me to post a photo from the Hamptons like everything is normal." I stared at the street below. "Did you?" "No." She took a shaky breath. "For the first time in my life, I said no." That hit harder than I expected. How did she react? She hung up. Of course she did. Ava turned toward me, expression raw. "I think Mom and Dad are more scared of embarrassment than consequences. Losing money? Losing property? That's manageable. But losing status? Losing the illusion? That's what terrifies them." Jack stepped out onto the balcony then, resting his arms on the railing. "You can't save people who think gravity doesn't apply to them." Ava huffed a small laugh. "You two always make things sound so simple." "It's not simple," I said. "But it is clear. And..." She looked down at the parking lot. "Do you think they'll recover?" Jack answered before I could. "Maybe. But it won't look like what they want. That kind of reputation doesn't rebuild clean. And the people who used to cheer them on will distance themselves the second it stops being beneficial." Ava swallowed. "I'm scared for them, but I'm scared of becoming them even more." "You won't," I said. "Not if you keep questioning things the way you are." "Now." She leaned her head back against the chair. "I don't even know where to start." "You already did," I said. "You came here. You told the truth. You're facing what's real instead of what's convenient." Ava's voice softened. "I'm sorry it took everything falling apart for me to see what you walked away from." "It's okay," I said. "Leaving is easier to judge from the outside." She nodded slowly. The next day, the fallout intensified. Articles spread faster. Investors pulled out. A whistleblower's testimony leaked. Journalists camped outside the Brooks estate gates. My father made a statement that looked more like a hostage video than leadership. My mother tried to host an emergency charity brunch to save face, but only 3 people showed up and 1 was probably lost. Ava stood in our living room, watching the coverage with her arms folded tightly. She whispered, almost to herself, I never thought I'd see them humbled. Jack joined her. They're not humbled, he said. They're cornered. Humbled comes later, if at all. Ava nodded, absorbing that. Then she asked the question I didn't expect. Should I go home? Be with them? I studied her face. Not fear, not obligation, just confusion. You can go, I said. But don't go because you think you owe them your sanity, Jack added. And if you go, don't take responsibility for anything you didn't do. Ava exhaled slowly. I want to help them, but I also don't want to lose myself again. Then set boundaries, I said. And if they ignore them, you walk out. She blinked. Walk out? Just leave? Yes, I said. You can always choose yourself. Ava hugged herself. I don't know how you did it. You will, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then whispered, Can I stay another night? Stay as long as you need. Jack nodded in agreement. Ava sank onto the couch like someone finally allowing herself to rest. As evening settled over the apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years whenever I thought about my family. Not anger, not grief, clarity. Their downfall didn't bring me joy, but it did bring truth. Truth Ava was finally brave enough to face, and truth my parents could no longer hide behind donations, invitations, or tailored statements. The Brooks dynasty wasn't ending because the world turned on them. It was ending because it was built on a foundation that was never real to begin with. And the only thing left standing now were the people who chose honesty over image. People like Ava. People like us. Ava woke early the next morning, sitting at our kitchen table long before Jack and I finished getting ready for work. She had that look wide awake but heavy, like someone trying to make a decision that kept slipping through her fingers. When I walked in, she pushed her phone aside and straightened. I'm going to the estate today, she said. I poured coffee, letting the steam fill the space between us. Because you want to, or because you feel trapped? Because I need to see exactly what's happening, she said. Not from headlines, not from secondhand panic. I need to see it with my own eyes. Jack leaned against the counter. Then you go. But you don't fix, you don't absorb. You observe, and you leave whenever you're done. Ava nodded. I'll try. Don't try, I said. Decide. She took a long breath, grabbed her coat, and headed out. Jack squeezed my hand once before he left for his briefing. She's stronger than she thinks. She always was, I said. But she grew up in a house where strength was treated like rebellion. He kissed my forehead. That's behind her now. 1. Ava showed up again in the late afternoon, moving slowly, her face pale and tired. She dropped onto the couch like someone returning from a battlefield. I sat beside her. How bad? She let out a breath that shook more than I expected. It's worse than the news says. I waited. She continued, voice low. The house doesn't feel like the one we grew up in. It's tense, dark, reporters everywhere. Dad's office looks like a crime scene made of paperwork. Mom was pacing the foyer like she was waiting for a jury verdict. Her hands trembled slightly. I placed mine over hers. They were furious, she said. Not scared. Furious. About the investigations. About losing donors. About me not showing up sooner. I frowned. What did they expect you to do? Smile, Ava said. Pretend everything was fine. Sit beside them so the press would think the family was united. Mom said, A good daughter protects the image. Dad asked why I was staying with you instead of being home to help control the optics. I rolled my eyes. Because nothing says stability like forcing your daughter into unpaid PR labor. Ava gave a weak laugh. When I told them I wasn't staying, Mom said I was choosing betrayal. Dad told me I was being emotional. Emotional, after everything. She swallowed hard. Then Mom asked me if Jack could help them. I blinked. Help them? She said, he must know people. He's important now. There must be connections we can use. Jack walked in at that moment, hearing enough to let out a quiet exhale. Ava continued, They don't care about your marriage, Elena. They care about how your marriage can save them. Jack sat across from her. Did you tell them the answer? Ava nodded. I told them no. That Jack isn't a business card, and you're not a tool. I stared at her, stunned in the best way. Ava kept going. Mom said if I walk away now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Dad said I was destroying the family structure. They begged, then threatened, then pretended everything was fine, then went back to panic. So, I said gently, how do you feel? She looked at me, eyes glassy but clear. Relieved, and guilty, and angry, and free. All at the same time. That sounds about right, Jack said. Ava brushed a tear from her cheek. I saw a version of them today I can't unsee. The desperation. The entitlement. The disbelief that anyone could tell them no. I nodded. They built their world on applause. Now they're learning what silence feels like. Ava took another breath. There's something else. Dad's lawyer was there. He told them flat out that the investigation is expanding. Not shrinking, expanding. And Mom looked at me like I personally hired the investigators. That tracks, I muttered. Accountability is their kryptonite. Ava managed a sad smile. Dad said if the family fractures now, the press will destroy them. The family fractured years ago, I said. They just didn't notice until it affected their reputation. Ava wiped her eyes. I told them I'm done lying for them. I told them I need space. I told them I'm not their spokesperson. Mom lost it. Dad shut down. And I walked out. I reached for her hand. I'm proud of you. She exhaled shakily. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So what now? Ava lifted her gaze slowly. I want a life that's mine, not theirs. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know I can't build it in that house. You'll figure it out, I said, piece by piece. She nodded. I want to try. A long silence settled, not heavy, just full of something new, something clean. Ava wiped her cheeks again. You know what's crazy? I thought losing money or status would feel like falling off a cliff, but being honest, it feels like stepping onto real ground for the first time. That's what freedom feels like, I said. Jack added, and the thing about real ground is, once you've felt it under your feet, you never want to go back to balancing on stilts. Ava gave a soft laugh. Yeah, stilts is a good word for our childhood. I nudged her shoulder. You're doing better than you think. I hope so, she whispered. Jack stood. You're safe here, start from that. No. Ava nodded, a small, real smile tugging at her lips. This feels like the first day of something, she said. And the truth was it did. Not because everything was fixed, but because she had finally stopped pretending the life she came from was something worth saving at all costs. For the first time, the Brooks legacy wasn't the loudest part of her identity. She was. And that shift, quiet, steady, undeniable, was the beginning of a kind of freedom no investigation or scandal could ever take away. Ava stayed seated at the table long after she finished talking, shoulders softening in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers, sneaking out of charity galas to breathe real air behind the catering tents. Jack refilled her water, not hovering, just present the kind of presence our parents never learned to give. When she finally stood, it wasn't with the rigid posture she used at society events. It was lighter, grounded, like someone who had stopped bracing for judgment. I called Maria, she said quietly. The accountant Dad ignored. I apologized. She didn't owe me forgiveness, but she gave it anyway. That was a bigger step than she realized. She said she'd been waiting years for someone in the family to admit the truth, Ava added. Years. Good, Jack said. Accountability is contagious. Oh. Ava's lips twitched into the faintest smile. I wish Mom and Dad understood that. They do, I said. They just understand it the way people understand gravity. They think it applies to everyone else. Ava let out a gentle exhale, not bitter, just honest. I'm not going back there tonight, or tomorrow, or anytime soon. That house feels like it's sinking, and I'm not going down with it. You won't, I said. You already swam out. She nodded slowly. I want to do something different with my life. Something useful. Something that's not about being seen. Jack didn't hesitate. Then start with anything that feels real. Even small things count. Ava rubbed her arms, the blanket slipping. What did you do when you left home? I joined the military, I said. Well, she sighed. I'm not doing that. I'd cry during push-ups. Jack raised an eyebrow. Everyone cries during push-ups. And Ava laughed, really laughed. and something in the room shifted, a kind of reset neither of us could have imagined a year ago. The weeks that followed felt strangely peaceful, even amid all the chaos outside our apartment walls. Ava found a short-term rental 2 blocks away, with creaky floors and a view of a grocery store, and somehow she loved it. She said the noise made her feel connected to real life. She started volunteering twice a week at a community center, helping women apply for grants, resume programs, and housing assistance. The first time she came home with dirt on her jeans, she texted me a photo like she'd discovered oxygen. The Brooks scandal continued to unravel in the background, hearings, audits, headlines that got worse before they got routine. But Ava didn't orbit that world anymore. She watched pieces fall without trying to catch any of them. One night, she came over for dinner again. Jack grilled chicken. I tossed vegetables in a bowl. Ava set the table. Halfway through eating, she said, "I want to see your base." Jack paused. "You want a tour?" She nodded. "I want to understand the world you built. I want to see why you chose this." It wasn't curiosity, it was respect. We cleared the visit through protocol, and a week later, she walked beside us across the tarmac, younger than her years, hair tied back, wearing simple jeans and a jacket, instead of carefully curated outfits. The wind carried the smell of jet fuel and dust, and for once, she didn't wrinkle her nose. She absorbed everything: the cadence of marching airmen, the clang of tools near an aircraft, the clipped voices over radios. "You really live a different life," she murmured. "It's real," I said. "It doesn't care how much money you make or what last name you have." She nodded slowly. "I think I would have liked growing up somewhere like this. Everything feels honest." Jack led us toward a commemorative wall etched with names of service members. Ava traced her fingers lightly across the metal, reading silently. After a minute, she said, "I understand now." "Understand what?" I asked. "Why you walked away from everything," she said. "Why you didn't need the family blueprint. Why they couldn't break you the way they break each other." Her voice was calm. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just clear. "You built something they never taught us how to build. Purpose, discipline, stability. And you chose a husband who has integrity instead of a resume." Jack slid his arm around my waist. "Her resume isn't bad either." Ava smiled faintly. "I'm proud of you, you know that, right?" I didn't answer immediately. The wind filled the silence. "Yes," I said. "I know, Maizen." It wasn't forgiveness. It was understanding. The kind sisters rarely reach unless they lose something together, then rebuild it separately. Months later, when Jack was invited to speak at a national leadership forum, Ava sat in the audience beside me, wearing a simple black dress she bought at a department store instead of a boutique. No photographers. No curated poses. Just presence. Jack spoke about decision-making under pressure, responsibility, and humility. The room listened with the quiet respect of people who understood he wasn't talking theory, he was talking experience. Afterward, Ava leaned in and whispered, "Do you ever think about what Mom and Dad would say if they saw this?" I shrugged. "Probably something about networking opportunities." She laughed into her hand. "Probably." But there was no bitterness, just acceptance. The house Ava grew up in was later sold to cover legal costs and debts. Our parents moved somewhere quieter, smaller, and more private. Ava didn't go visit, neither did I. Not out of hatred, but because our lives didn't bend toward that world anymore. We built new traditions instead. Sunday dinners, long walks, celebrations that didn't revolve around money or status, holidays where no one assessed anyone's outfit, nights where the biggest dilemma was whether to watch a movie or make popcorn for the second round. A family, not a brand. The kind I used to wish for as a kid. The kind I finally had. Ava flourished in her work, not because it impressed people, but because it helped them. She earned respect, not through inherited privilege, but through genuine effort. And every time she knocked on our door with takeout or a story or a question, Jack greeted her like she belonged. Because she did. I never got an apology from my parents that felt sincere. I never expected one. Some people never grow past their own reflections. But Ava did. And that was enough. The Brooks family name may have cracked under its own weight, but the Brooks daughters walked away lighter. Some endings aren't dramatic. Some endings are just honest. And honesty, I learned, is the first step toward a life you choose, not the one chosen for you. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this journey. If you want more stories like this, cheating stories, revenge stories, family drama, husband betrayal, and the quiet strength that comes after, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your story too.